Hello, welcome to the show. This is Soulstar Radio on the A1R Psychic Radio Network and also Moonstruck TV. I'm Jacquelene Close-Moore, your host, and today I've got a wonderful guest joining us, and she's actually Maggie Hamilton, who's written Inside the Secret Life of Fairies. It's actually a beautiful looking book there, and she goes right into all about the fairies today, nature spirits, and all that sort of thing. And I'm just going to sort of put here, I love the dedication. Poor Rose, and of course that's her Scottish grandma. Fairies are wise, enchanting, rather mysterious folk. When you invite them into your life, there's no end to the beauty and goodness that they will bring. And certainly in our world at the moment, there's a lot of crazy stuff going on. There's materialistic oligarchs and authoritarians running the show, isn't there? And of course, this is inviting us to step into a gentler part of life. And when we deal with nature spirits and sprites and elementals, there's a much more of an honest essence to that energy. So it's really quite poignant that this is the timing that we've got Maggie Hamilton joining us. So you're there, Maggie. Welcome to the show, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you. It's lovely to be with you.
Absolutely beautiful. Now, tell us a bit about, you started off with your Scottish grandma, Rose, and so she's introduced you to fairies and to all those realms?
She did. I grew up in the north of England just after the war in the 50s. And what was astonishing then was that people had a very close connection with nature and with the nature spirits as living beings, not as these tinsely kind of figures that we tend to see in gift shops. And it wasn't until more recently I realised how precious this was. And this began with my Scottish grandmother and an experience in a meadow one day where we climbed over the wall into this beautiful meadow. And when we came to leave, we couldn't get out because the stile that we climbed over had disappeared. And I was about 2.5 or 3 at this stage. And I looked to my grandma. I wasn't frightened or anything. I was a bit perplexed. And she said, "Don't worry about it." She said, "It's the fairies. They're having fun with us." And I realised at that moment, Jacqueline, that some part of me was claimed by the beauty and extraordinariness of that kingdom, which has actually seen me through my adult life, which has mainly been in cities. And I guess I've written this mainly for people in towns and cities because that's where most of us live. And we have this narrative that we're disconnected from nature and that we can't be anything other in cities, which is just not so.
That's exactly right. And certainly I find, even in a suburban backyard, I remember moving into this particular rental that I was really called to in some quite interesting ways as I roll my eyes, because the 6 months before I got there, this old man would come to me in my sleep and say, "Are you coming yet? To this house?" And he showed me the house and what it looked like, and he was showing me what it looked like 40 years ago. It had a market gardens everywhere, and of course since then everything had been built up. And so I was looking for a rental at a particular time, a few months into this, and I turned up to this real estate agent at 9 o'clock in the morning. They said, "Oh, look, you've got to see this house." And I went, "Ugh. That house." No. Go there. It's really inexpensive. It's going to help you get, on top of things. Yeah, just what you need. And, we'll help you get it. And I'm like, I've never been to this real estate agent before. And they're like totally wanting me in that property. And yet I was looking at these other properties and I'm like, yeah, but I like those better. No, go and see this one. So I turned up at the door and I went, holy crap, that looks like the front yard of this place. And I, been seeing. And as I came up to the front door, there was a crow feather in the fly wire, which my animal totem, one of the key ones for me, is actually crow. And I'm like, oh, here we go. So I opened the door and I heard the same man's voice going, "Well, it took you long enough, darling." And I went, "Well, how long have you been up for rent?" And he goes, 5 months. He said, "What took you so long?" And I'm like, here we go. All right. What I really didn't like about the place was it was at the end of a T intersection, which in feng shui terms is like, and there was a lot to fix in that place on an energetic level. But what I found most interesting in this suburban backyard was the fairy ring. And that's the fairy ring in the grass. And I'm like, Okay, better apply for the place. Got it straight away.
Yeah, that is so beautiful. And I think the exciting thing, because we know that the planet is really suffering at the moment with, the environment and our total lack of love and care for it. But what is so wonderful is that we all have places in our towns and cities in nature where we feel really at one. And what I encourage people to do is to spend time in that sacred place and to get to know the trees, the rocks, really intimately as we would a friend, a lover, or a small child. Take note. And that is when we start to cross over into the vibration of the fairy, because there's not a person on the planet who has experienced the fairy realm, not just once or twice, but most of us have experienced it 100 or more times, but we just did not realize what we were touching. And that, I think, is terribly exciting.
It really is. I love your analogy as well about the fairies deciding to not let you out the gate of the garden.
Yes, yes. And I think the thing is also for me, fairies do manifest themselves sometimes as little figures with butterfly wings, but for a lot of people, they may never see a fairy, but they're experiencing that vibration. So every time we have a beautiful moment, aha moment in nature that just captures our soul, a sunset, a drop of a dewdrop, whatever it is, when all of us expands, that is when we touch the realm of the fairy. And then we have to ask ourselves, well, why is this happening? Because we tend to have this naive view that fairies are just there to kind of give us a bit of a thrill. They're doing that because they're calling us to be back into oneness so that we can actually be more useful on the planet. And so what I see, all these beautiful experiences we've had from being very little, it's kind of like the squirrel that gathers up the nuts in winter. We gather up all these beautiful experiences, we hold them in our hearts. And then when the wintry times come, which they do for all of us through our life, because that's part of the growth, we don't like it, but that happens, we have that warmth. And also if we have those places in nature we can go to, if I'm feeling incredibly sad or whatever, I will always, if I can, go to my parks and places in Sydney, and I'll sit under a big old tree because I know they know me. I know they can read my senses, and I know that I will get healing there without having to have the big narrative. So there's some really powerful stuff we can be working with here, Jacquelene.
Absolutely. I find also that I can see, the spirits coming up out of the water, the nature spirits out of the water, and like whether it's in a river, whether it's in the sea. And do you sort of see those sorts of things and perceive them as well?
I do. I feel them more than I see them, but I do see them from time to time. I'm very sense oriented, so I very much feel. And also I've found in those times when I've had dark nights of the soul that what I've experienced from that is the messages I get. And I was in outside of Tucson at one stage and went to see those incredible cacti that we associate with cowboys, the beautiful big cacti, the saguaro, which are about 20 feet or so high. And it had been a big time, and I just found myself drawn to this saguaro and particular cacti, and it said to me, each of us, and by that stage they've grown for years and years to get to that point, they said, we support so many different life forms, each of us, but we can only do that because we have our spikes. And our spikes are there as boundary keepers, and you need to have a look at your boundaries, which was just what I needed to know at the time. but such a practical that I cannot help support others if my boundaries are not in place.
Yeah.
And that's what I love about the wisdom. It's so practical. It's immediately applicable for us.
Yeah, there's my family lives next to a forest for generations, and there's a particular tree that you can stand inside of, and it's very much shaped like the mother and birth the child, so you can stand inside of it, and you're like, oh, and there's a tree next to that tree that has bubbly shapes all over it that looks like faces, and you shouldn't climb that tree or hug it because it has red sap coming out of it, and it's like, yeah, leave them alone. And you come in touch with a lot of energies in that particular forest, and that's the forest we used to for generations. You'd see like 4 generations of us walking right through the forest from way here to way over to that town to buy all the supplies and flour and stuff like that for 2 weeks, and walking all the way back again. And pretty much everything else we ate was, in the garden or something like that. And my mother was the last generation in my family to take that walk. But I remember one particular time walking in the forest with a girlfriend. We'd gone to visit my grandparents at the forest, and and my grandfather said, "Now, mind you, be back before it's dark." We got back after dark, and he went right opposite us, and he said, "You've brought it back with you." And I remember that when we were in the forest walking, and it's just on dark, and I said, "We really have to turn back now." And my girlfriend was very adventurous, and, "Oh, no, let's keep going." I said, no, I'll be in a lot of trouble, and there'll be something that's not right in here. Anyway, we saw this man walking towards us, and his eyes were black, like no light at all in his eyes. And as he walked straight past us, we turned around and he wasn't there, and we ran back so fast because his energy was quite chilling. And so we got back to the house, and that's when my grandpa went right off. He said, "And you saw him, didn't you?" And, I'm like, but you couldn't hide anything from Grandpa anyway because he was really good palm reader and everything else, and very connected to that forest. And the thing with the forest was it's open all day for tourists to walk in and out all day long. Tourists always do, all day, in and out, And it's like after dark, or if there's fog during the day that comes in over the forest, like woof, it's like the guardians of the forest want to leave them alone, give them a bit of a rest.
Yeah.
So do you find those sorts of things happening in forests as well?
Absolutely. And, this thing of actually space for I like to see fairies as the living intelligences of nature, because then they can come in many forms. It might be the man you saw. It could be anything, really. And when I was growing up, it was very much there are places that are not for you to be because they need that. And even within the garden, I learned as a little girl that we should always leave a wild patch because that actually helps a garden thrive. It's kind of like almost their sacred space because they have to deal with us all the time, as you say, tramping everywhere and, of course, pulling trees down and moving boulders. And the First Nations people, they understand, or like your granddad who knows that land well, that we're living amongst many other ecologies here. And the other thing is we need to honour the spirit of the land because it holds our story. And I've got a lovely little story around that if you'd like me to share it.
Please.
Around the spirit of the land. A friend of mine is Maori, which is First Nation person from New Zealand, as you know, but he was fostered when he was about 3 or 4. So he grew up in Australia, away from his culture, knew very little about it. And as an adult, he went back for a funeral, and their funerals are huge, take several days, tangis. And when he went back onto the tribal land, even though he'd lived most of his life overseas, he said it was like this silk handkerchief fell over him. So anyway, after a few days, he travelled north and he came to this place, and it was an explosion of beauty, and it was just almost orgasmic, I suppose you could say. And he said he felt a bit embarrassed because he actually almost loved it more than his tribal lands. And then it happened again further up in the bush at another place. And then he came back to Australia, and years later he was back in New Zealand, and he bumped into one of the elders, and he said, "Can I ask you something?" He said, "You know, I went to this bay and I just adored it. And then I went to this bush place." And the elder smiled at him and he said, "Yeah, I can tell you what that is." He said, "Your mother's people came from that bay area a few generations back." And he said, "Our tribe came from that bush area several generations back." And Julian said to me, he said, and I've got loads of examples of this, he said, "The land remembered me and I remembered it." And it's such a profound thing. So when we're in the city, I mean, I live in an apartment, we're now putting down new stories on this land. And part of that needs to accommodate all these other beings that help this land thrive, which is what your granddad completely understood. Bless.
He really was special. And even like with New Zealand, holds a special place in my heart. Because the first time I had to go to New Zealand was for work, and I had to go up and down the North and South Island and visit different sites and train people. And I could plan my trip any way I wanted. And I made it so that I would fly to Auckland, change planes, go straight to Whakatane. And I got my car at Whakatane. I drove straight down to a particular spot, and I then got out and I walked right to this particular spot on the beach, sat down, and I watched a waka coming in with women on it. Wow. And the woman shouted out, "I will act as a man." And she took up the oar and she brought the women to shore. And then she got out of the canoe and she looked at me, and I just burst into tears and cried, because I'm like, how are you seeing me? How am I seeing you? And it's that relationship with New Zealand that I have, because it's my coming home. And so every time I go to New Zealand, I have to go to Whakatane first. And where I was where the Māori people first came ashore, because they were guided to come that way, to that particular spot. So it's like nature calls us, doesn't it? It has that kind of energy.
And the delicacy to hold our story through time. I ended up in the Highlands a number of years ago, and I'm walking the hills, and it's wild and it's rugged and it's beautiful. And then suddenly I start to see the history with the English, which of course is terrible, like video clips. And my dad's Scottish and my mum's English. And I realised there were these two big stories in me that needed reconciling. So I think often there's a healing there, or a blessing, which is what you were getting. I think I was being called to heal those two parts of me, the oppressor and the oppressed. And this then takes us into the ancestral thing, which is very interesting. But I just think when we can expand our view of what fairies are, it's astonishing, the world of beauty and miracles that opens for us.
Oh, yeah, like standing at Lake Parky in New Zealand, I actually watched spirit energies that were like 70 foot tall. And I'm like, right then. And I'd seen something like that in a special place that I won't name in Victoria when I went to a special lost site. It's a lost site. I've taken Indigenous people there so it could be found. Once I found it, and, but there were three brothers in that area that they called brothers, and they're very tall. And when I first went there, they were quite threatening. "Who are you?" And I said, "I'm not here to do anything to this site. I've found it." And so the two brothers were coming, and I said, "There's a third one of you, isn't there?" And he's further up the road, and I won't name where. And he's much taller. And so there was like guardians of the land, sort of halt who goes, and, do you pass muster? And so because of the respect I was conveying, they were saying, "Yes, you can come here any time, and please do tell the elders where we are and bring it back."
That is so special, Jacquelene, because what it's holding is the wisdom and healing through time that we have access to, because I very much believe that the fairy folk, which is just like a whole range of nations as we have on, on our human level, that enables us to access healing and wisdom through time, because I believe that they are plugged into the quantum field to a level that we're not, which is why when we access them, we feel so alive, because we're drawn back into the dance of atoms to a new level. And it's a higher vibration. And often we know when we're experiencing that because things become hyper real. And one day I've worked in publishing a lot of my life, and I was just going out. I always had to get out of the office, at lunchtime to just clear myself and breathe some fresh air. And I just got myself a sandwich, and I went to sit on this grass looking down to Sydney Harbour. And it's a big piece of grass. And as I sat down with my sandwich, it was like electricity. And then this incredible sense of anticipation, the sort of thing that we experienced when we were kids, just before Christmas Eve, that kind of, wow, something's going to happen here. And the next minute, I just had all this life energy, and the green of the grass was a green I have never seen. And it was as if I was experiencing the life energy of every blade of hundreds of thousands of blades of grass. And yet around me, people were having lunch, there were babies and mothers. And I don't know how long it lasted, because you go into the eternal now, and then it's over. And I'm back there clutching my sandwiches. And it's just very exciting.
Yeah, it is. I find sometimes, like in emergency situations, I can enter that all time and nothing, because everything slows right down to milliseconds, and you're passing slowly through milliseconds. And that's like that different space that you're in a joyful way. But I've actually used that when a car, I was driving, lost contact with four wheels, lost contact with the road, exactly painting around a bend. And I'm like, boom. And then I was like, great, put off the brake, steer the other way, and then going through it. And then as we got through the other side, we're doing 100 kilometres an hour. And my son said, oh, my God, did that just happen? And I said, what happened? And he said, you lost all four wheels and you made the car go around this without us going off the road into the ravine. What? And I went, well, did you watch time slow down? And he went, actually, it did slow down. I went, well, this is a special place. It's a place where you're not emotionally freaking out. You're calm. You're completely calm. And everything and nothing is right there. And you're able to go through what to do next to get yourself out of this split-second moment. And so if I'm in readings with people, it can be 30 seconds of our time, but for me it's like half an hour, and I can run through what I'm going to say and how that's going to work. And so that's kind of realm you're talking about, and it's really quite a beautiful discussion we have been able to have today. We've run out of time, but what I'd like to do is invite you back on the show another time, and we'll discuss more. But it's been wonderful speaking with you, Maggie. And once again, that book, I'm going to put some links up today so our viewers can find it. Whoop, there it is. And thank you very much for joining us on air. We'll catch you all next time on Soulstar Radio. There's more shows coming up this evening, afternoon and morning, wherever you are around the world on Soulstar Radio and A1R Psychic Radio Network. Catch you next time. Bye.